In every neighborhood, in every quiet family street, people believe their homes are safe, until a story like this shakes that belief to the core, because today's case forces a painful question in the hearts of millions. Can a 14-year-old really understand murder, or can a child's silent pain turn into something far more dangerous than anyone could imagine? This story begins not with crime tape or police lights, but with a celebration, a warm family gathering meant to welcome a long-awaited baby, a moment full of hope, laughter, and second chances after many years of heartbreak. But behind those smiles, deep inside that house, sat a girl who felt less like a daughter and more like a shadow fading in her own home. Ek asi larki jo zindagi main pali bar mesus kar rohe thaiki, shayadusk baghir sabziata kushhain, or yisak kebhai bakan ko and her rast parlajati hai. Older viewers know this fear well, the fear that someone you raised, someone you trusted, could be carrying storms inside their heart while looking perfectly calm on the outside. And that fear becomes even sharper when the one carrying the storm is just a child, because when a child commits violence, the whole world asks, who failed first, the family, the system, or the child's own mind? Is kahani main hum dekhinj ki ek pyara sagar kistera kuch minutes ki andar crime scene bangia, how innocence turned into violence, how a daughter stood behind her own mother holding something heavy, something cold, something that would end two lives and destroy every future dream they ever planned together. And as this case unfolds, you'll see every fear that older adults carry, fear of betrayal, fear of losing family, fear of danger hiding in plain sight, come alive in the most unexpected way. Lekin sabsi pela sawal yahai. When the killer is a child, is justice still justice, or just another tragedy wearing a legal mask? But what happened inside that beach house, in those 4 silent minutes, will make you question everything you thought you knew about family, innocence, and danger. The day had started with pure happiness, the kind that fills a home with soft colors, warm voices, and the quiet excitement of finally welcoming a long-awaited child into the world. Because for Jennifer, this baby shower wasn't just a celebration, it was a victory after years of pain, miscarriages, and silent nights of praying for a miracle. Asnias din kile kitni duin mangi thin, weeks spent choosing decorations, tiny blue clothes, soft toys, and a banner that read, "Welcome Baby Ethan," each item a piece of the future she dreamed of. Family arrived with smiles, hugs, and gifts wrapped in hope. The rented beach house glowed with ocean light, its wooden deck facing the waves like a peaceful stage for a beautiful family moment. Inside, laughter echoed, cameras clicked, and everyone admired the mother glowing with 7 months of joy, everyone except one girl sitting quietly in the corner. Mara, Jennifer's 14-year-old daughter, watched every gift being unwrapped with a tightening in her chest, a silent storm building behind her eyes. Jitna ziyada log baby Ethan kai bot cart, utna hai woapni jagakoi hui mesus kardi thai, jays is gar main uski roshni dunli ho rahai ho. Older viewers know this feeling too well. The fear of being replaced, forgotten, or slowly pushed out of your own family's heart. While Jennifer celebrated a new beginning, Mara felt like her own ending had already begun. No one noticed the way she stared at the lighthouse statue earlier that day, or how she kept glancing at her mother with a mix of longing and resentment. Iskashiki dinki pichwo tension, peda ho rahai thai jo kisi ni mesus nahai kai, na family ni, na guests ni, na kud Jennifer ni. And as the evening sun dropped lower, turning the sky orange, a quiet shift happened inside Mara's mind, a shift no one could see but everyone would later question. Did she break in that moment, or had the break been building long before this day ever arrived? Because after this sunset, happiness would never enter that house again, and one girl's silence would soon turn into a scream the whole nation would hear. The rented beach house looked like the kind of place families choose to heal, reconnect, and make memories that last a lifetime. Raised on wooden stilts, wrapped in soft pastel colors, with a deck facing the endless blue ocean, it felt like a peaceful world separated from all the noise of life. Samandar kai halki hawa, dek par giati dihup, or gar ki andar gumti muscurahitain, yasab milkarek tazali bara manzar banate, the kind of scene where no one imagines danger hiding in the shadows. But beauty can deceive, and in this house, every peaceful corner held a thread of tension no one noticed until it was too late. Inside, the living room glowed with decorations Jennifer had arranged with love. Small sailboats on tables, soft blue ribbons hanging from windows, and a warm fireplace where a decorative lighthouse statue stood, heavy, detailed, and meant only to be a symbol of guidance, not destruction. Lekin isgar kai kamoshi main, ek or cheese gum rahai sai, ek 14 sol kai larki kai andar hai andar ubalta huagasa, a jealousy so quiet that even the closest family members didn't feel it rising. Mara moved through the house like she didn't belong in the celebration anymore. Every wave outside the window seemed to echo her loneliness. Every laugh felt like a reminder she was no longer the center of her mother's world. This beautiful house, meant to bring the family together before the baby's arrival, slowly became a pressure cooker of emotions, joy layered on top of resentment, love mixing with silent hurt, and a daughter's fading sense of home. Garjitna Sundar Tha, Utna Hayan Daza Lagana Mushkil Tha Ki Yahai Jaga Kuch Hours Bod Ek Murder Scene Ban Jayagi, where the same walls that held laughter would hold screams, and the same deck that saw sunsets would witness something no one could undo. And while the adults admired ocean views, Mara stood at a window alone, watching the waves hit the rocks again and again, almost as if the sea itself was whispering, "Everything can fall, everything can break." And as night approached, this perfect house was about to reveal how quickly beauty can turn into horror when one broken heart finally reaches its breaking point. Jennifer Morrison was the kind of woman people remembered, not because she was loud, but because she carried a softness that made everyone around her feel seen, safe, and important. Wo har kisi ki le care kardi thai, cha wo usk students hun, ya uski family, and after years of heartbreaking losses, she had finally reached a moment she thought she would never see. Her pregnancy had made it safely past the point where doctors told her hope usually ends. She was 7 months along, glowing in a way only a mother carrying both joy and gratitude can glow, feeling Ethan's kicks like tiny reminders that miracles still happen. Her colleagues at the elementary school adored her for her creativity. Jennifer turned marine science into magic, building little ocean worlds for students so they could learn by touching, exploring, discovering. At home, she was the emotional anchor, the gentle voice, the steady hand. Usk andar wo himat thai johar musabat ki bod or masbut hodi jadi hai, especially after losing 4 pregnancies that nearly broke her spirit. But instead of giving up, she kept building hope piece by piece until Ethan finally arrived as a promise fulfilled. She wanted this baby shower to be perfect, not for show, but because she wanted her family to feel the joy she had fought so long to reach. What Jennifer didn't know was that while she was planning nursery colors, folding tiny onesies, and daydreaming about holding her baby boy, her teenage daughter was slipping further into a darkness she didn't recognize. Jennifer tried to pull Mara closer, texting her, inviting her, encouraging her, but every attempt met silence. Wo samaj hai nahai pai ki uski kushi kisi or ki le dard ban rahai hai, and that the child she loved was quietly drowning in fear of being replaced. In Jennifer's eyes, this weekend was about unity, healing, and celebrating the miracle growing inside her. In Mara's eyes, it felt like the final proof that her mother's heart had no room left for her, and sometimes the most dangerous tragedies begin not with hatred, but with love that feels stolen, misplaced, or lost. Mara wasn't always this quiet, this distant, this swallowed by her own thoughts. She had once been a bright, curious kid who asked endless questions and followed her mother everywhere. Magar wakt ki soth ek ajib si dori peda hodi gei, a slow emotional drifting that no one fully understood, not even Mara herself. As Jennifer's pregnancy progressed, something inside the 14-year-old began to change, something that didn't show up in arguments or loud outbursts, but in silence, long, heavy silence that wrapped around her like a second skin. She watched her mother talk excitedly about baby clothes, nursery colors, ultrasound pictures, and felt a sharp sting each time the word Ethan echoed through the house, like it was slowly replacing her own name. Yuze lagtasaki har guzere, dinki soth wo, upni family main peach hodi yarahai hai, like a book everyone had finished reading and quietly put away on a forgotten shelf. Teenagers often feel things more intensely than adults realize, feel invisible when no one is ignoring them, feel unloved even when they're surrounded by love, feel replaced even when there is still room for them. But Mara wasn't just feeling these things, she was sinking into them. Every unanswered text from her mother felt like proof that she didn't matter anymore. Every baby outfit unwrapped felt like another reminder she wasn't a part of the new life forming in the family. And the worst part, she didn't know how to say any of it out loud. Wo chup rahai, or uskiya kamoshi dir zeher ban lagi, twisting her thoughts, rewriting conversations in her head, making her believe stories that weren't true. And when a teenager starts believing they've been pushed out of their own home, their mind can become a dangerous place, even if no one sees it happening. Jennifer assumed her daughter was just being a typical teen. The family assumed she was moody. No one realized she was breaking. And when a child breaks in silence, the world often doesn't notice until something inside them finally shatters outward. As the baby shower continued, the room filled with soft laughter, rustling wrapping paper, and excited voices admiring each tiny gift. Little socks, baby blankets, stuffed animals, and pastel blue outfits that everyone knew would soon belong to little Ethan. Har gift ki soth logon kai kushi or barti ya rohaisai, the kind of happiness that warms a home. But for Mara, Every smiling face felt like a spotlight showing her exactly where she did not belong anymore. She sat quietly in the corner, pretending to scroll on her phone, but every unwrapped box cut a little deeper into her already fragile heart. Each time her mother held up a gift and smiled, Mara felt a new message forming inside her mind. This is the future, and you are not part of it. That wasn't what Jennifer meant, not even close, but teenage emotions kabhi sache ko by Dunli kar didi hain, turning harmless moments into painful ones. Nobody noticed how Mara's shoulders tightened with every cheer, how her eyes lowered each time someone mentioned big sister responsibilities, how she swallowed hard whenever someone joked that Ethan would complete the family. For Jennifer's relatives, it was innocent fun. For Mara, it was confirmation of her worst fear. The room buzzed with joy, but for her it buzzed with reminders she didn't want to hear. New baby, new attention, new love, and maybe no place left for her. Even the decorative lighthouse statue on the mantel seemed to stare back at her with a cold, silent presence, a symbol of the home she felt slipping away. Ispal Maingar Walan ko laga sab kuch perfect chal raha hai, but the cracks were forming quietly in the corner, a corner no one checked, a corner where a daughter felt like she was disappearing. And when a person feels invisible long enough, they start searching for ways to be seen again, sometimes in the worst possible ways. And soon, this quiet corner would become the starting point of a tragedy no one in that room was ready to face as evening approached. The glowing Florida sun dipped lower toward the water, painting the sky with orange and gold tones that made the entire beach house look like a picture-perfect postcard. Magar iskubsarat manzar ki peach ek asi kamoshi, peda ho rahai thai jo kisi, ko sunai nahai de rahai thai. Especially not to Jennifer, who stepped outside just before sunset, craving a breath of fresh ocean air. She slid open the deck door gently, wanting a quiet moment away from the noise, away from the celebration, away from the joyful chaos inside, just a few minutes with the sea she loved so much. She rested her hands on the wooden railing, the wind brushing her hair, her pregnant belly rising and falling with calm breaths, her mind drifting to plans for Ethan's future, nursery colors, first words, holidays, a life she finally believed was possible. Inside, the family kept laughing, cutting cake, taking photos, assuming she'd return any minute. Or corner main Bethai hui marani dekaki uski maik kamash lamski le bahar gei hai, and something inside her stirred, a mix of longing, anger, and a voice whispering that this was her last chance to be heard. To Jennifer, this sunset was peaceful, but to Mara, it felt like the world was splitting into two paths, one where her mother walked toward a future she didn't belong to, and one where she did something desperate to stop that feeling. The sky kept deepening into a richer orange, the waves kept crashing softly, and the deck stood silent, unaware that within minutes, it would become the most important piece of evidence in a case that would divide the nation. Yewo lam hasajab ekma ko laga ki wo baz, kuch der kile aram kar rahai hai, unaware she had just stepped into the final moments of her life. And as that sun dipped below the horizon, another shadow quietly followed Jennifer onto the deck, a shadow that carried jealousy, fear, and something far more dangerous in its heart. Jennifer stood on the deck, unaware that behind her, a moment was forming that would erase every plan she ever made, every dream she ever held. Inside the house, the celebration carried on, voices, laughter, the clink of plates, but Mara's world had gone completely silent. Wo chup shapath kar kari hui, her steps slow, mechanical, almost detached, as if some part of her mind had already decided what the rest of her body would do. She walked toward the living room mantel where the lighthouse statue sat, heavy, cold, harmless-looking to everyone but her. She wrapped her fingers around it, feeling the weight settle into her hand like an answer she'd been searching for. In her teenage mind, twisted by fear and insecurity, this didn't feel like a weapon. It felt like a way to stop the pain burning inside her. Without making a sound, she moved toward the deck door, the statue hidden behind her leg as she slid the glass open. Usniapni mako bulya nahai, us roka nahai, usni bazaski teraf deka jays yi sab pale site tha, like her emotions had already built a story she couldn't step out of. Jennifer didn't hear her approach. The waves were too loud, the wind too soft, the sunset too distracting. And in that tiny window of time, just 4 minutes on camera footage, everything changed. Mara raised the lighthouse, her breathing shallow, her hands trembling, her mind a storm of confusion and anger that no adult in that house had ever realized existed. She brought it down with a suddenness that even she didn't fully understand, a moment of violence born not from hatred, but from a desperate, broken belief that she was being erased from her mother's life. Jennifer collapsed instantly, her body falling forward over the railing, down toward the rocks below, a fall no one heard, a fall no one expected. Oras lam main marani pali dafa mesus kia ki wapas yakar sab kuch normal dikana hai uski zindagi kagla kadam hai. her mind switching from action to survival in seconds. But what Mara did next, the calmness that followed this violent moment, would shock investigators even more than the murder itself. When Jennifer's body hit the jagged rocks below, there was no scream, no final call for help, just the heavy thud swallowed instantly by the crashing waves. Inside the house, no one heard anything. The celebration noise masked the tragedy unfolding just a few feet outside. Garweli apai by cake kot rostha, photos la rostha, unhen bilkul and daza nahaisaki unkai zindagi, is whacked battle chuki hai, while the woman they loved lay motionless on the shoreline. Her dress darkened with blood, her limbs twisted unnaturally, her body caught between rock and tide. At first glance, it looked like an accident, a pregnant woman stepping out for air, losing balance in the dimming light. The deck railing was high, the rocks below were unforgiving, and the ocean's whisper could easily mislead anyone into thinking nature had played its cruel hand. But nature hadn't done this. Something else had, something human. Jennifer's injuries didn't match a simple fall. Wound ka pattern kuch or haike rahatha, but no one knew that yet. For nearly 2 hours, her family carried on with the baby shower activities, believing she had taken a walk down the beach for some quiet time. Mara's lie was simple, delivered in a steady tone that raised zero suspicion. Mom went for a walk, that was it. No tears, no tremble, no panic, just a calmness that would later chill investigators to the bone. And while everyone waited for Jennifer to return, her husband David grew uneasy, checking the deck, calling her phone, stepping outside with a flashlight as darkness settled over the beach house. When the beam of his light finally reached the rocks below, Uski chik ni puregar kai kamoshi tordi, a sound so raw that it froze every relative in place. He scrambled down the wooden stairs, shaking, trying to reach her, hoping for a pulse that wasn't there, a breath that would never come. But the real shock wouldn't come from finding Jennifer's body. It would come from the evidence showing her death wasn't a fall at all, but a deliberate strike. Inside the house, the celebration carried on like nothing had happened, voices rising, plates clinking, jokes flying across the room, because Mara walked back into the party with the kind of calm only investigators later described as unnatural for a child. Usni bilkul a's behave kia j's wobaz bathroom si wappies ho, not like someone who had just ended 2 lives on the deck. She wiped her hands clean on her dress earlier, placed the lighthouse statue back on the mantel, as if adjusting a simple decoration, and then slipped quietly into the background again. When relatives asked where Jennifer went, Mara didn't hesitate. Her voice held the same steady tone she always used when answering school attendance calls. She went for a walk on the beach. Simple, controlled, believable. No one questioned her. No one imagined she was lying. No one even noticed the faint moisture on her wrists from rinsing the statue outside. Teenage calmness is often misunderstood as moodiness, and the adults simply assumed she was acting distant because of the baby shower. Hisiko shak nahai hua ki wo calmness ek cover up ka hisathai, hiding the storm she had unleashed minutes earlier. While Jennifer lay bleeding on the rocks, Mara cut a slice of cake and placed it aside for her mother, an action so disturbingly normal that it would later make detectives shiver while replaying the footage. She even handed someone a napkin, laughed quietly when a cousin made a joke, and tied a loose balloon string without a tremble in her fingers. 2 whole hours passed like this. 2 hours of family members continuing the evening, completely unaware that the person who knew the truth was sitting just feet away from them, eating cake, watching them panic slowly as time dragged on. When David finally shouted Jennifer's name outside, when the house erupted in confusion, when everyone rushed to the deck, Mara stayed back, her face blank, her expression unreadable. Wo na roi na chikai, na bagay, baz kamoshi si kari rahai, and that silence would later speak louder than any confession. But detectives would soon discover that beneath Mara's controlled calm, the truth was already leaking through tiny cracks they hadn't noticed yet. When first responders arrived, flashing red and blue lights washed over the quiet beach house, painting the wooden deck and sandy driveway in frantic colors that clashed harshly with the peaceful ocean behind it. To them it looked simple at first glance. Ek pregnant woman Jo Shamki whacked Hawakane Bahar Gei Ho, Faisal Kar Nichgur Gei Ho, a tragic accident in a beautiful place. The fall seemed believable. The rocks were sharp, the tide rising, the deck railing tall but not impossible to topple over if someone leaned too far. Paramedics checked Jennifer, but it was too late. No pulse, no breath, no chance for her or the unborn child she had protected so fiercely. Family members were sobbing, voices shaking, chaos spreading through the deck as they tried to understand how a moment of peace turned into a nightmare. In that chaos, Mara stood off to the side, arms folded, face still, body language eerily controlled. Itni controlled ki ek experienced deputy ni note kia ki uski expression bilkul unnatural lag rahai hai, but he wrote it off as shock. Teenagers process trauma differently, he thought. Maybe this was her way of coping. The sheriff's deputies gently separated family members, taking statements that, without knowing it, were all built on one lie Mara had planted. She said she wanted a walk. She said she needed fresh air. She probably slipped. Everything lined up neatly, too neatly. The deck was dry, the wind was calm, and the fall looked possible, but something about the scene whispered that something else lurked beneath the surface. Still, for now, it remained an accident case. Crime scene tape wasn't put up yet, the family wasn't treated as suspects, and the lighthouse statue sat quietly on the mantel inside, Bilkul Beguna Lagtahua, hiding the truth that would soon rip this entire story apart. The paramedics loaded Jennifer's body into the ambulance while the ocean kept crashing softly, as if nothing had changed, yet everything had. But when the medical examiner studied Jennifer's injuries, he would discover something that didn't match any fall, and that one detail would flip this case from accident to murder overnight. At the shore, under dim portable lights, the medical examiner knelt beside Jennifer's body while officers waited quietly, expecting a routine confirmation of an accidental fall. But within seconds, his eyes narrowed in a way that only trained professionals recognize. Yegern wala zakhim nahilagta, he murmured under his breath, noticing the depth, angle, and shape of the wound on the back of Jennifer's skull. Falls leave irregular injuries, scattered bruises, defensive marks, but this wound. It had a disturbingly clean pattern, almost as if a single solid object had struck her before she ever hit the rocks. The family stood several feet away, crying softly, their faces pale and confused, unaware that the examiner's quiet observation had just shifted the direction of the entire investigation. The deputies exchanged glances, just small ones, subtle, uncertain, but enough to signal that this wasn't as simple as they first assumed. Joe fracture pattern high, wo kissy specific cheese si mila hua lag raha high, the examiner explained, choosing his words carefully so as not to panic the grieving family. He pointed out that there was hardly any sign of Jennifer trying to break her fall, no defensive scrapes on her hands, no bruises on her arms, details that didn't match the scene. Inside the house, the deck railing was intact, the surface clean, the height too tall for someone to simply trip and fall over. Something wasn't adding up, and the more the examiner studied her injuries, the more one chilling truth emerged. Jennifer was likely unconscious before she went over the railing. Or agar koihash main naho, to wo swayam nahigur sakti, use juria jatahai. The paramedics had already left, the family was being guided away, and deputies were keeping the scene undisturbed. But the examiner's final quiet conclusion would echo through the sand, through the deck, through every piece of evidence waiting to be discovered. This wasn't a fall, this looks like a blow. And once detectives heard those words, they would begin searching the house, not knowing the murder weapon was sitting in plain sight, wiped clean, waiting to betray the killer who tried to hide it. As midnight settled over the beach house, the festive glow that once lit its windows faded into the cold, clinical brightness of investigation lamps, transforming the home from a place of celebration into a silent crime scene. Deputies moved carefully through each room, their footsteps slow, their expressions sharpening as the medical examiner's earlier words echoed in their minds. This looks like a blow, not a fall. Is ek jumle ni puri rat ka mahal battle dia, turning what they thought was a tragic accident into something darker, something intentional. Family members had been escorted to a nearby hotel, still believing Jennifer's death was a freak fall, unaware that suspicion had quietly entered the house the moment the injury didn't match the rocks below. For investigators, the silence inside was heavy, almost eerie. The decorations from the baby shower still hung softly in the air, the tiny blue outfits folded neatly, untouched by the chaos unfolding just a few feet away. Officers documented everything, the deck railing height, the placement of chairs, the layout of the living room. They searched for signs of a struggle, broken glass, overturned items, footprints, but everything looked strangely perfect. Itna perfect ki wo perfection kud ek warning lagni laga, like someone had made sure nothing looked disturbed. Detectives walked past the fireplace where the lighthouse statue sat quietly, appearing harmless, decorative, almost welcoming. No one suspected it yet, not tonight, not in these early hours. For now, their focus was on the deck, the rocks below, and the possibility that someone had been with Jennifer in those final minutes. As the ocean wind slipped through the broken quiet, the house seemed to hold its breath, waiting, watching, almost whispering the truth that investigators hadn't uncovered yet. But the clues were there, hiding in plain sight, waiting for morning light to reveal them. And while the officers wrapped up their notes and secured the scene, not one of them realized that the murderer had already cleaned the weapon, wiped their hands, and stood among the family earlier that evening. Ek asi kamoshi ki soth jo ob sab ko shak main dalni wali thai. And at sunrise, one small detail inside the living room would crack the case open, because the weapon wasn't hidden at all. It was proudly displayed where everyone could see it. When morning light poured into the beach house, investigators returned with fresh eyes, ready to walk through every corner again, but this time with the mindset of a homicide team, not accident responders. As they moved through the living room, something subtle, almost invisible, caught the attention of forensic technician Melissa Chen. Uski Nazar mantle par rakai ek decorative lighthouse statue par jaruki, a simple white and blue ceramic piece that looked completely ordinary. But in a house full of family fingerprints, dust from vacation luggage, crumbs from last night's celebration, and smudges from dozens of hands, the lighthouse stood out for one strange reason. It was too clean. Not polished clean, unnatural clean, as if someone had wiped it recently. Chen leaned closer, noticing a faint difference in the surface texture compared to other decorations. One item in a room full of touched, handled, and dusty objects looked like it had been washed. That alone wasn't enough to label it suspicious. Magar investigators Kakam Hoda Hai Chodi Si Chodi Cheese Ko ignore na Karna, and her instincts told her something was off. She lifted the statue carefully, feeling its weight, surprisingly heavy for decor. The base seemed slightly damp in certain grooves, like water had dried unevenly. She examined nearby items. Picture frames, candle holders, sailboat decorations. Each one had a natural layer of oils from touch or settled dust. Only the lighthouse looked sterile, too sterile. Chen ran a special light over it, and her breath paused as she noticed something nearly invisible. Microscopic specks on the backside, specks that reacted faintly under forensic lighting, specks that looked like tiny traces of blood someone had tried to wash away. Her face tightened in a way only detectives recognize, a silent signal that something major had just been found. The officers paused, watching her as she leaned in again. If this was blood and if it had been wiped, then this wasn't an accident. Or sabsi deroni bat yethai. The weapon wasn't hidden, buried, or thrown away. It had been sitting in the open all night, displayed like a proud piece of home decor, holding evidence of a truth no one was ready to accept. But the lighthouse wasn't done revealing secrets, because once labs tested it, what they found underneath the cleaned surface would point straight to the killer. As investigators gathered around the lighthouse statue, the room seemed to grow heavier, as if the truth inside that harmless-looking ceramic piece was quietly preparing to speak. Under normal lighting, the statue looked spotless, bilkul saf, bilkul biguna, the kind of item a family might dust once a month and never think twice about. But under forensic light, everything changed. Tiny flecks appeared, barely visible to the naked eye, but unmistakable to trained professionals. Microscopic blood particles tucked deep into the statue's textured ridges, especially around the rocky base design. These weren't accidental stains, nor were they the kind that happened from casual touch. They were the kind left behind after impact, after force, after violence. The kind left behind even when someone tries very hard to wash them away. Technician Chen's voice was calm, but firm as she called the lead detective over, showing him the faint constellation of blood that should not have existed on a decorative item inside a living room. "Yeah, blood transfer lag to high or cleaning attempt by," she said quietly, pointing out the uneven streaks, the places where water had dried, the thin residue no wipe could fully erase. That meant one chilling thing. Someone had cleaned the statue after the blood got on it, which meant someone knew it had blood on it, which meant someone touched it after the attack. Chen documented every angle, marking areas where luminol highlighted what a quick rinse couldn't hide. The ceramic's porous texture had absorbed tiny fragments, tiny truths, that no murderer could fully scrub away. Deputies exchanged stunned glances. A fall from the deck couldn't put blood on a statue in the living room. A stumble couldn't cause this pattern. Yet kisi solid object Caesar kablo lagni kanadi jatha, the kind only a person could deliver. And that meant murder, not accident, not misstep, murder. The lighthouse statue was no longer a decoration. It was now the weapon, and it was about to lead investigators directly to the person who held it last. But blood wasn't the only thing hiding beneath the surface, because when they searched deeper, they found fingerprints trapped under the cleaned layer, fingerprints that would expose the killer's identity. The lighthouse statue sat under bright forensic lamps, its glossy ceramic surface hiding secrets that only science could reveal. Blood alone was damning evidence, but what investigators found next changed everything. As technicians used advanced chemical processes to examine the statue, they noticed something unusual: smudged impressions beneath the dried blood, faint but present, like ghostly marks trapped under the very layer meant to hide them. These weren't surface fingerprints, they were prints that existed before the blood ever touched the statue. That meant only one thing: just shaks ni statue ko pakra tha, usni blood lagni si pale pakra tha, or bod main use soft by kia tha. Using a technique designed to detect prints under contaminants, the lab enhanced the impressions, slowly revealing distinctive patterns that matched a specific person's hand shape and finger spacing. Technicians compared them with elimination prints taken from every family member earlier in the case. One after another, prints were ruled out: David's, Jennifer's, relatives, responders, cleaners. Until finally, one match stopped everything in the lab. The prints belonged to Mara Morrison, the 14-year-old daughter who had calmly told everyone her mother went for a walk. Investigators stared at the results in stunned silence. A child's fingerprints underneath her mother's blood. A weapon washed quickly but not well enough. A lie delivered without hesitation. Yasab ek high direction main ishara kar rahatha, pointing at someone no one wanted to suspect. But evidence doesn't care about age, family, or emotion. It only tells the truth, and the truth was now screaming. Detectives replayed the timeline in their minds. Mara silent during the party, Mara vanishing for 4 minutes, Mara returning alone, Mara suggesting the walk. The pieces, once scattered and innocent-looking, were clicking together with terrifying clarity. Fingerprints under the blood meant Mara didn't just touch the statue. She touched it before the blow, during the blow, and after the blow. The murder weapon had spoken, but the next piece of evidence would seal her fate, because the camera outside had caught something no one expected, a silent witness that recorded the truth in real time. While investigators examined the lighthouse statue inside the house, another team canvassed the nearby properties, hoping anyone, had seen Jennifer on the deck before she fell. Most homes were vacant vacation rentals, their windows dark, their driveways empty. But 3 houses down, an elderly couple mentioned they had a security system pointed toward the water. They didn't think it captured anything important. Hammer camera surf waterfront cover cart Hain, they said, but detectives asked for the footage anyway. What they found changed the entire investigation. The camera didn't show faces clearly, it wasn't meant for that. But it captured shapes, movements, and timing in homicide cases is everything. At 6:28 p.m., Jennifer stepped onto the deck, the sunset glowing behind her silhouette. At 6:29 p.m., a second figure appeared behind her, small, slender, unmistakably a teenager. Mara Thai, walking out with empty hands in the earlier frames, but returning with her right arm pressed close to her side, as if hiding something bulky. The footage then showed something even more unsettling. Jennifer never came back inside. Only Mara did. At 6:32 p.m., the teen slipped into the living room, sliding the door shut with calm precision. No panic, no shouting. No running, just silence. Meanwhile, the deck remained empty. The beach below stayed undisturbed. The entire scene froze on video like a haunting still image of a crime no one heard happen. The detectives replayed the footage multiple times, their eyes narrowing with each pass. Koi by dusra insan dek par nahi tha, one investigator whispered. No stranger, no intruder, just a mother and daughter, and then only the daughter. The timing matched the fingerprints. It matched the blood. It matched the silence. It matched everything. The camera had quietly recorded truth while everyone else assumed tragedy was accidental. And in those 4 minutes, the image of Mara returning alone became the most important visual evidence of the case. But investigators still needed one more piece. The timeline of lies Mara carefully told inside the house, lies that would crumble the moment detectives confronted her with the footage. Once investigators combined the fingerprints, the blood evidence, and the camera footage, a clear and chilling timeline began to form, one that didn't depend on emotions, guesses, or anyone's version of events. Science jute nahi bolta, and neither do timestamps. At 6:28 p.m., Jennifer stepped onto the deck alone, unaware of the danger behind her. 1 minute later, at 6:29 p.m., Mara followed her, calm, quiet, focused, her silhouette matching perfectly with the teenager seen on the neighboring security camera. The footage showed her approaching her mother, then disappearing out of frame with her. No other figure entered the deck. No sound suggested a struggle. No shadow suggested an outsider. Then came the longest 3 minutes of the entire evening, 6:29 to 6:32 p.m., a window in which only 2 people were present, and only one would return. At 6:32 p.m., Mara slid the glass door shut behind her and walked back into the party with the same unsettling composure she carried all night. And yet, when relatives asked where Jennifer went, her lie was immediate. Mom went for a walk. Investigators noted the precision, no hesitation, no confusion, no sign she was making up something on the spot. She repeated the line exactly the same way an hour later when David asked. And again when the deputies questioned her. Consistency that would have looked innocent. Agar forensic evidence as ki kilaf cheek nahi raha hoda. Meanwhile, the camera told its own silent story. From the moment Mara re-entered the house, no one else stepped onto the deck. No stranger came. No fall was visible. Jennifer's silhouette never reappeared. Whatever happened to her happened before she went over the railing. And whatever happened to the lighthouse statue, being lifted, swung, cleaned, happened in that tiny time frame too. The timeline left no room for accident. and no room for anyone but Mara. Every second, every shadow, every lie pointed to the same truth. This wasn't a moment of chaos, it was a moment of control. And now, with evidence stacked against her, detectives were ready to break through the last layer of the case, the motive hiding deep inside Mara's own mind. As investigators dug deeper, they needed to understand why a 14-year-old girl would do something so violent, so final. Evidence showed how Jennifer died, but the reason behind it was still buried somewhere inside Mara's tangled emotions. That answer came unexpectedly when detectives searched the family's belongings at the beach house. In Mara's suitcase, beneath folded clothes, inside a zipped inner lining, they found a small, worn notebook. Ek journal jo shayad kisi or ko masum lagta, magar investigators kile wo ek kuli kitab ban gaya. Its pages were filled with raw, unfiltered thoughts, a teenager's private world of fear, jealousy, and confusion. But these weren't normal teenage frustrations. Over the past few months, her entries grew darker, sharper, more desperate. She wrote about feeling ignored, forgotten, replaced. She scribbled lines about her mother talking only about the baby, about how the nursery was more important than her, about how every smile Jennifer gave was now for Ethan, not her. One entry read like a quiet scream. It's like I'm disappearing and no one even notices. Another hinted at deeper paranoia. They're planning to send me away. I know it. They don't need me anymore. Investigators circled that line. It aligned with something David had mentioned earlier, that the family had casually discussed boarding school options for Mara's future. But in her journal, that harmless conversation had twisted into a belief that she was being pushed out, replaced by the baby, unwanted. Unko Mary Koizero at Nahai, she wrote. I'm just the old kid, they want the new one. Each page revealed a mind spiraling further away from reality, building a story where she was the victim long before she ever became the suspect. The journal didn't excuse anything, but it explained the inner storm that had been quietly forming, a storm no one noticed until the damage was irreversible. And when detectives reached an entry dated just days before the murder, one that hinted she was thinking about doing something that would change everything, they knew this wasn't sudden rage. It was a breaking point months in the making. But the most tragic part wasn't what Mara wrote, it was what Jennifer wrote in her own journal, the mother's words no one read until it was too late. Detectives already had Mara's journal full of fear and resentment, but they didn't understand why she believed she was being replaced, until they found Jennifer's journal tucked inside her luggage. If Mara's notebook showed a child collapsing under her own emotions, Jennifer's journal revealed a mother desperately trying to hold her family together. Is diary ni wo sab kuch kaha jo Jennifer zinda hodito kabhai patty. She wrote about being excited for Ethan, yes, but she also wrote about worrying that Mara felt distant. Entry after entry showed a mother trying, texting her daughter, inviting her to help decorate the nursery, planning mother-daughter outings to reconnect. But Jennifer's biggest worry was written in a line that detectives highlighted immediately. I hope she doesn't think this baby replaces her. There's room in my heart for both my children. And right beneath that, another line, a heartbreaking one. David thinks the boarding school brochures upset her. We've explained they're just an option, not a decision. This was the misunderstanding that built the entire tragedy. Jennifer and David had been looking at boarding schools with strong science programs, schools that matched Mara's childhood dream of studying marine biology, just like her father. Magar Mara ni isbat ko bilkul ulta samcha. In her mind, the brochures weren't opportunity, they were eviction notices. She believed the new baby needed her room, and she needed to be sent away. But Jennifer's journal showed the exact opposite. They were planning to keep Mara close, supported, guided. They were trying to give her a future, not take one away. This painful contrast between what Mara believed and what Jennifer intended became the emotional core of the case. Two people living in the same home, loving each other deeply, yet seeing the world through completely different emotional lenses. One fearful, one hopeful, one drowning silently, one unaware. And this gap, this tragic misunderstanding, fueled months of resentment inside Mara until it finally snapped on the deck that evening. But detectives still needed one more piece, the behavior Mara showed after the murder, behavior so unnervingly calm it shattered any hope that this was an impulsive accident. After the murder, what shocked investigators wasn't just the weapon, or the wounds, or the silence of the deck, it was Mara's calmness, a calmness so controlled, so steady, so chilling that even seasoned detectives found themselves unsettled. For 3 days, while the family mourned, while detectives scrambled for answers, while reporters began circling the small island community, Mara behaved like someone untouched by the storm she created. Wo bilkul tarik si bat kardi rahai, jays uski zindagi main kuch by nahai badla ho. She repeated her lie with eerie consistency. Mom said she wanted a walk, never adding details, never slipping. never contradicting herself. When asked what she was doing during the time her mother disappeared, she answered casually, just sitting with everyone. When relatives cried around her, she comforted them with practiced words, not too emotional. Not too cold, just neutral. Detectives noted she didn't ask many questions. No, what happened to mom? No, is she going to be okay? Only quiet observation, watching the adults panic while she maintained the same steady breathing she had the night of the murder. Yewo Cheese Thai Joe officers ko bechin kar didi hai, because shock in children doesn't usually look like this. They cry, they cling to someone, their voices tremble, but Mara. She stayed perfectly still, perfectly in control, as if she were rehearsing each moment in her head before living it. When the police asked her to walk them through the timeline, she didn't hesitate. Every answer was sharp, straight, believable. Too believable, and that unnatural consistency, paired with no emotional breakdown, made detectives suspicious long before the forensic results arrived. To cover up a crime, especially at 14, requires presence of mind, an ability to smile when needed, to stay quiet when needed, to hide in plain sight while everyone else collapses. Or Mara ni yesab teen dintak kardi rahai, never cracking, never slipping, never showing the fear most killers, especially children, eventually show. But her calmness had cracks too, cracks detectives were waiting to widen. And once the lighthouse results came in, those cracks would shatter, because the next knock on Mara's door wouldn't be comfort, it would be an arrest. 3 days after the murder, the Morrison family was still trapped in grief, relatives grieving Jennifer, neighbors offering condolences, and David moving like a man whose soul had been split in half. No one expected what would happen next. Koi bai nahai sak saktasaki police jiski le a rahai hai, wo ek 14 sol kai larki hogi. On the morning, detectives received the full forensic confirmation, the blood, the fingerprints beneath it, the camera footage aligning perfectly. They drove quietly to the aunt's house where Mara had been staying. The team didn't use sirens. They didn't want a scene. They expected denial, panic, maybe screaming. But what they got was something else entirely. Mara was sitting in the backyard, scrolling on her phone, legs crossed, as if life had returned to normal. She didn't flinch when officers approached. She didn't cry when they read her rights. She didn't even ask why she was being arrested. Instead, she looked at the detectives with an expression that was almost blank, almost rehearsed, almost expecting it. Askai Kamoshi ni officers ko or by Zayada Pershan Kardia, because most children break the moment the handcuffs appear. They tremble, they ask questions, they insist they didn't do it. But Mara simply stood up, placed her hands where instructed, and walked toward the police car with the same emotionless calm she displayed since the night of the murder. Her aunt collapsed into tears, unable to understand how the teenager she cared for could be capable of something so horrific. David, when informed, stood frozen, stunned, shattered, unable to fully process that the daughter he raised, the child he loved, was now being taken away for killing the family he fought so hard to build. The community reacted with disbelief. Neighbors whispered, "She was always so quiet." Teachers said, "She never caused trouble." People struggled to reconcile the calm, polite teenager with the brutality of the crime. But evidence doesn't lie. And when detectives placed Mara in the police car, the truth was unavoidable. She wasn't being questioned anymore. She was being charged, but detectives still needed more, not just what happened, but why, and the interrogation room would soon reveal just how cold, calm, and detached Mara truly was. After Mara's arrest, detectives didn't rush into accusations. Experience ni unhen sikya thaki kabhai sach ko jalbuzzy main nahai nikol na chayai, especially with someone as unusually calm as Mara. They needed her guard down, her mind comfortable, her confidence steady, so that when they finally brought out the evidence, the impact would hit harder than any direct confrontation. Detective Nathan Sanders, a seasoned investigator with years of juvenile case experience, led the strategy. He knew that teenagers rarely maintain lies under controlled pressure, but Mara wasn't behaving like a typical teen. She wasn't panicked, she wasn't defensive, she wasn't confused. Wo Bilkul stone cold calm thigh, a trait Sanders had seen only in adults who planned their narratives carefully, so the detectives decided to proceed slowly. First, they questioned family members again, collecting every detail of Jennifer's last movements. Then they cross-referenced camera timestamps with phone records. Then they waited for the DNA confirmation on the blood, now knowing full well it would match. During this time, they avoided confronting Mara. They didn't tell her what they knew. They didn't show her the footage. They didn't mention the statue. Instead, they let her sit with her thoughts, believing she still had the upper hand. Psychological pressure without a single word spoken. Police ko padathaki jitna zayada woapne jut paryakin kergi, utna hai wo tadna asan hoga. Meanwhile, Sanders crafted a plan for the interrogation. Start with soft questions. Build rapport. Act like they're still evaluating it as a possible accident. slowly introduce contradictions, then, at the breaking point, drop the forensic evidence. The goal wasn't just a confession. They wanted to understand her mindset, her motive, the emotional trigger behind the killing. Because even with all the physical proof, the why mattered. The courtroom would need it. The nation would demand it. And Mara's chilling calmness suggested the truth wouldn't come easily. But once she entered the interrogation room, it became clear this wasn't just a child hiding guilt. This was someone who believed she had outsmarted everyone. Inside the juvenile interrogation room, cold walls, metal table, a single camera blinking red, Mara sat with the same unsettling calm she displayed since the night of the murder. Wobilkul A's lag Rahai Thai J's Kissy School counseling session main Bethai Ho, not a teenager accused of killing her mother and unborn brother. Detective Sanders entered slowly, his voice soft, friendly, almost gentle, exactly as planned. He started with harmless questions about school friends' hobbies, memories with her mom. Mara answered smoothly, eyes steady, tone controlled. Not once did she tremble, not once did she show fear, and that was the first crack. Because guilt shakes people, even children, even liars, but Mara remained a still lake, too still. Sanders leaned in, lowering his voice. Tell me again, when did you last see your mom? Without blinking, Mara repeated the same lie she'd told for 3 days. She went for a walk on the beach. Same tone, same pace, same script, yet unnatural consistency obsede shak ka signal ban chuki thigh. Sanders gently asked, did you step outside after her? Mara paused, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. No, that tiny hesitation was all Sanders needed. He didn't reveal it yet, but he knew the camera had already proven she was lying. Over the next hour, he nudged the inconsistencies, her position in the room, the missing minutes, her unemotional reaction. But Mara stayed stubbornly calm, deflecting every angle with the confidence of someone who believed adults were too blind to see the truth. Then Sanders shifted, his voice grew firmer. Mara, we have the lighthouse. Her shoulders stiffened, a tiny movement but the first real reaction. Sanders continued quietly, it has blood on it. Her eyes twitched. He leaned closer, voice barely above a whisper, and it has fingerprints under the blood. Mara froze. The mask didn't crack, it shattered. Her breathing changed, her gaze drifted, her fingers trembled just once. For the first time, her silence wasn't calm, it was panic disguised as stillness. She knew the game was over, but the real turning point wasn't the lighthouse. It was when detectives revealed the footage showing her on the deck, the moment she realized there was no hiding from the camera that captured everything. When detectives finally placed the printed still frame of the security footage on the metal table, Mara walking onto the deck behind her mother, something inside her shifted. Wo Paley Dafa Bilkul Suni Ho Gei, her eyes locked on the image like she was staring at a version of herself she couldn't deny anymore. Sanders didn't raise his voice, didn't accuse, didn't threaten. He simply slid another photo forward, the lighthouse with blood flecks glowing under forensic light, then another, the enhanced fingerprint pattern, then another, Jennifer's fall timeline. Slowly, calmly, methodically, he turned the evidence into a mirror Mara couldn't look away from. Tell me what happened, he whispered. For a long moment she stayed silent, her jaw tightened, her breath hitched. Her foot tapped once, tiny signs of a breaking storm. Or furwo mask Jotin Dintak Bilkul Sahai Salamat Tha Dear Tutni Laga. Her voice, when it came, was not loud or angry. It was small, detached, almost confused. She wasn't listening, Mara whispered. She kept talking about the baby, everything was about him. Her fingers curled into fists as she stared at the table. She spoke in fragments, as if remembering pieces she had been trying to bury. How she watched her mother unwrap gifts, how each smile felt like a knife, how the boarding school brochures convinced her she was being replaced. I thought they didn't want me anymore, she said quietly. I just wanted her to look at me. Sanders didn't interrupt. He let the silence fill the room. Mara swallowed hard. I grabbed it, the lighthouse. I didn't think, I just hit her. Her eyes stayed empty, no tears, no regret, only a distant numbness. She fell over, I didn't push her, she just fell. She talked about washing the statue, returning to the party, slicing the cake, pretending everything was normal. I thought if I acted like nothing happened, maybe it would go away. Her voice trembled, not with guilt, but with confusion, as if she was still trying to understand her own actions. Am I supposed to feel sorry? She asked, her voice flat. I don't know how. The detectives exchanged a glance. They had the confession, but what chilled them more was how she confessed. Calm, emotionless, like retelling a memory that didn't belong to her. And now, with the confession recorded, prosecutors were ready to build a case so strong, the courtroom would never forget the quiet teenager who shattered her own family. Once Mara's confession was secured, prosecutors wasted no time assembling a case that would be impossible to crack. Ek Asa case Joe emotions par nahai, bulk science, timing, or cold facts par based tha. They knew the nation would be watching. They knew a 14-year-old facing adult charges would ignite controversy, and they knew the defense would argue impulsivity, immaturity, and adolescent brain science. So the prosecution built their foundation on evidence so solid, no emotional argument could shake it. First, they mapped the timeline, the deck footage, the 3-minute window, and the moment Mara returned alone. Then came the forensics, blood traces in the lighthouse grooves, fingerprints beneath that blood, and hair fibers embedded in ceramic ridges. Fur autopsy report, clearly stating Jennifer's fatal injury came from a blow, not a fall. No defensive wounds, no signs of her reaching for balance, no evidence she tried to stop herself. A surprise fall doesn't strike from behind with perfect force, it was intentional. They collected witness statements from every family member, each describing Mara's unnatural calmness, her lack of reaction, her repeated walk story delivered with the same exact words every time. Prosecutors highlighted the consistency not as innocence, but as calculation. Then came the journals, the emotional key to motive. They placed Mara's paranoia-filled entries alongside Jennifer's gentle, worried notes about her daughter, painting a tragic but clear picture. Mara believed she was being replaced. Jennifer had been trying to pull her closer. Yet misunderstanding high murder ka sidha motive ban gaya. Prosecutors prepared visuals, diagrams, reenactments, and scientific explanations, each designed to make jurors feel the inevitability of the truth. They prepared expert witnesses, medical examiners, forensic analysts, handwriting specialists, psychologists, to show that Mara's choices before, during, and after the murder showed awareness, planning, and concealment. And finally, they held their strongest evidence, the quiet, emotionless confession where Mara admitted every detail yet struggled to feel anything at all. Ye wo moment thajab prosecution ko pada chal gya ki unka case observe strong nahai, unbeatable ho chuka hai. And when this mountain of evidence walked into the courtroom, it wasn't just a trial, it became a national debate that divided the country. The day Mara's trial began, the courthouse looked less like a place of justice and more like a battlefield of public opinion. Media vans, reporters, photographers, and dozens of people lined up just to catch a glimpse of the 14-year-old girl accused of murdering her pregnant mother. News channels argued whether she was a monster or a broken child. Social media exploded with debates. Some people demanded life in prison. Others insisted she needed therapy, not punishment. But inside the courtroom, where the air felt cold and heavy, none of those opinions mattered. Only evidence did. Only truth did. And the truth was about to unfold in front of a jury that looked both nervous and stunned. Mara sat at the defense table wearing a plain navy dress, her hair pulled back simply, making her look even younger. Itni chodi lag, rohaisaki logon ko yakin hai nahai, awa rohasaki yawohai larki hai jispar itnabara ilzum hai. Across from her, prosecutors were armed with binders, digital displays, timelines, and photos, ready to walk the jury through every minute of the murder. David, her father, couldn't sit inside because he was a witness, but when he passed Mara while entering the hallway earlier that morning, he froze. His daughter looked at him once, blank, unreadable, before turning away. The judge opened the trial with a stern reminder. You must ignore her age. You must follow only the evidence. And then came the opening statements. The prosecution painted the murder as deliberate, calculated, fueled by jealousy, and covered with calm precision. The defense countered by describing a child overwhelmed by emotion, misunderstood, lost in her own fears, arguing that her brain wasn't fully capable of processing consequences. Every word tightened the tension in the room. Every photo made jurors shift in their seats. Every mention of 4 minutes felt like a punch to the chest. The courtroom wasn't ready for what it was about to hear. Not the science, not the journals, not the confession, and certainly not the emotional collapse that would hit when witnesses described Jennifer's final moments. But the trial's most powerful impact would come when the experts took the stand, because their testimony would slice through every doubt and expose the truth with brutal clarity. When the prosecution brought their expert witnesses to the stand, the courtroom's energy shifted instantly. Ye wo stage thajahan emotions kai jaga science ni lilay, and science doesn't bend, doesn't pity, doesn't excuse. The medical examiner, Dr. Garcia, explained the injuries with precise, almost surgical calm. Using diagrams and models, he showed how Jennifer's fatal skull fracture had a distinct shape, the kind caused by a solid, heavy object, not rocks, not a railing, not a fall. This wound was delivered by force, he said, and from behind. His voice carried a weight that settled over the jury like a cold shadow. Jennifer had never seen it coming. Then came the forensic technician, Melissa Chen, the one who discovered the blood on the lighthouse statue. She demonstrated under courtroom lights how microscopic blood traces were embedded in the ceramic ridges, uncleanable, untouched by the rushed wash Mara attempted. She explained how the cleaning left streaks invisible to the naked eye but obvious under forensic light. And then she dropped the biggest revelation. We found fingerprints beneath the layer of blood. The room tightened. Jurors leaned forward. Even Mara, who had sat stiff and quiet the entire hearing, blinked rapidly. Chen explained how those prints matched Mara's. Exact position, exact pressure, exact angle, proving she held the statue before it ever touched Jennifer's head. Next was the video analyst. He walked the court through the footage second by second. Jennifer walking onto the deck alone, Mara following, and only Mara returning. No intruder, no other person, no outside possibility. The defense tried to argue camera angle, lighting, possible distortion. Magar Har objection, forensic evidence ni tordia. Finally, the prosecution displayed the timeline. 6:28, Jennifer steps out 6:29. Mara follows 6:29, 6:32. No one else enters the deck 6:32. Mara returns alone. The science was airtight. The facts were cold. The sequence was undeniable. And as jurors absorbed it all, the defense table seemed smaller, quieter, almost powerless. But the emotional blow didn't come from the experts. It came when Jennifer's husband took the stand, and the courtroom finally saw the human cost behind the science. When prosecutors introduced Jennifer's journal into evidence, the courtroom, already tense, already emotionally drained, fell into a silence so deep it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. This wasn't science. This wasn't forensics. This wasn't a diagram or a timeline. Ye ekma ki dil kai awaz thai, written in her own handwriting, never meant to be read in a courtroom filled with strangers. The prosecutor held up the pastel blue notebook, the same color Jennifer had chosen for Ethan's nursery, and read her words aloud. Entry after entry described her excitement, her fears, her attempts to reach Mara. One line made several jurors wipe tears. I hope she doesn't think this baby replaces her. Another line made Mara lower her gaze for the first time. I want her to know she will always be my first baby. Always, Jennifer wrote about trying to reconnect, how Mara was withdrawing, how she felt her daughter slipping through her fingers. I wish she knew how much I love her, she wrote just days before the murder. Every sentence cracked open the emotional truth the evidence hadn't shown, the deep love of a mother who had no idea her daughter was drowning in fear. Then came the entry that broke the courtroom entirely. I hope this weekend brings us closer. The same weekend that ended her life. This journal wasn't a legal document anymore. It became Jennifer's voice, speaking across death, exposing a tragic misunderstanding that spiraled into horror. Jurors weren't just listening, they were grieving. Even the defense team looked visibly shaken, because Jennifer's words didn't accuse, didn't blame, didn't show anger. They showed love, confusion, hope. A mother who wanted nothing more than to bond with her daughter before the baby came. Or Yebat Sabki Diltak Tir Kai Tera Lagi, because while Mara's journal revealed fear and resentment, Jennifer's revealed compassion and longing. Two worlds living under one roof, but never crossing. Two hearts beating in the same home, but never understanding each other. If anything could make the jury feel the weight of this tragedy on a human level, it was this notebook. But the trial wasn't done breaking hearts, because next came the moment none of them were prepared for, Mara's father taking the stand. With the evidence presented and emotions running at their peak, the courtroom shifted into the final battle, the clash between prosecution and defense, two narratives fighting over the fate of a 14-year-old girl. Yewo stage thajahan kanun, science, psychology or insani emotions, sab ek jaga takra rahtha. The prosecution began with a firm, steady voice, laying out their argument like a surgeon placing each instrument with precision. They argued that Mara's actions were not an impulsive teenage outburst, but a sequence of decisions: retrieving the lighthouse statue, following her mother, striking her from behind, cleaning the weapon, returning to the party, maintaining a fabricated story for 3 days. These are not the actions of a confused child, the prosecutor said. These are the actions of someone who understood exactly what she was doing. Then came the defense. Their tone was softer, emotionally rich, almost pleading, reminding the jury that Mara was only 14, a child whose brain was still developing, whose emotions were unstable, whose understanding of consequences was limited. A teenager under emotional stress doesn't think logically, the defense attorney argued. She reacts, she panics, she spirals. They pointed to the boarding school misunderstanding, the psychological evaluations, the attachment issues, the loneliness in her journal. They painted her not as a cold-blooded killer, but as a broken child lost in her own mind. The jury watched both sides like spectators at a moral tug-of-war. Should age reduce accountability? Should fear excuse violence? Should brain science outweigh blood evidence? Jury ki charon par confusion soft nazar rahai thai, torn between justice for a murdered mother and mercy for a distraught teenage daughter. Both lawyers knew this case wasn't just about guilt, it was about interpretation. What did the murder really represent? A calculated killing or a catastrophic emotional collapse? The closing arguments ended in silence, the heavy kind that feels like the world is pausing to breathe before collapsing now. After weeks of testimony and heartbreak, the case would leave the lawyers' hands and enter the minds of 12 strangers, the jury who held Mara's fate in their verdict. When the jury entered the deliberation room, the door closed behind them with a final, echoing click ek AC. Awaz jo yayad dila rahai sai ki ab ek 14 sal kai larki kai zindagi, in 12 germudar if logon ki faisle par depend kardi hai. The table was covered with binders, photos, maps, timelines, and journals. On one side lay the lighthouse, its picture enlarged on glossy paper, showing every ridge where blood and fingerprints were found. On the other lay Jennifer's journal, soft pastel pages filled with love and worry. And somewhere between them sat the truth they had to decide. Was Mara a murderer with adult awareness, or a child swallowed by fear? Jurors replayed the footage again, Jennifer walking out, Mara following, and then the empty deck. They examined the fingerprints under the blood, the autopsy diagrams, the clean statue, the timeline with no gaps. Sab sabut ek hai bot ke rahtha ye fall nahai tha, ye accident nahai tha, ye murder tha. But then they read Mara's journal, page by page, seeing a teenager lost in spiraling insecurity. They remembered the defense psychologist's testimony about adolescent brain development, impulse control, and catastrophic thinking. They discussed her calmness. Was it calculation or shock? They debated for hours, not over what happened, but over whether a 14-year-old could grasp the finality of death the way an adult does. One juror said, she knew enough to clean the weapon. Another argued, she's still a child, kids act without thinking. The room pulsed with tension as they weighed justice against mercy. But the timeline didn't bend, the science didn't bend, the confession didn't bend. No matter how young Mara was, the evidence painted a picture of intentional action followed by deliberate cover-up. Akhirkar jurors co-exact faisla lena hypoda, and after just 4 hours, far faster than anyone expected, they knocked on the door, signaling that the verdict was ready. Outside, the courtroom braced for impact. Prosecutors tightened their jaws, defense attorneys exhaled slowly, reporters lifted their pens. David Morrison clasped his hands, tears already forming. The door swung open, the jury walked in, and silence swallowed the room. What came next would not just seal Mara's fate, it would ignite a nationwide firestorm about children, crime, and justice itself. The courtroom felt frozen as the jury filed back to their seats. Na koi awaz, na koi fusel harkat, surfek asi kamoshi jo sans lena by mushkil karda. Mara sat motionless, her hands folded, her face expressionless. The judge asked the foreman to read the verdict, and in that split second before he spoke, the entire room held its breath. On the charge of first-degree murder of Jennifer Morrison, we find the defendant guilty. Gasps scattered softly through the gallery. Mara didn't flinch, not a blink, not a tear, not even a tremor. On the charge of first-degree murder of unborn child Ethan Morrison, we find the defendant guilty. The words rolled through the courtroom like thunder, heavy and final. David Morrison dropped his head into his hands, shoulders shaking, not because he disagreed, but because the verdict confirmed a nightmare he never thought possible. His own daughter had killed his wife and unborn son. Reporters scribbled furiously. Lawyers exchanged glances, prosecution relieved, defense defeated. Some jurors wiped tears, torn between the decision they made and the child they had condemned. Yet they knew the evidence left no room for doubt. Mara's face remained a mask, blank, distant, as if she were watching someone else's story unfold. Uska reaction sab ki li or by ziyada disturbing tha, because even in the moment her fate was sealed, she showed no sign of understanding the gravity of the verdict. When the judge thanked the jury for their service, their expressions revealed the emotional toll. Some looked exhausted, others troubled, others hollowed out by the weight of judging a child for an adult crime. As deputies moved to escort Mara away, she glanced once toward her father. He didn't meet her eyes. Couldn't, not today. Not after hearing the truth spoken out loud in a room so full of broken hearts. Outside the courthouse, the verdict spread across the nation instantly, news channels blasting headlines, commentators debating whether a 14-year-old should ever face life imprisonment. Social media erupted. Supporters, critics, communities, all torn apart by one case. But the story wasn't over yet, because the next phase, Mara's sentencing, would become the most controversial moment of all. Long after the verdict, long after the courtroom emptied and the cameras left, David Morrison sat alone in a hallway chair. Ek asi tanhai main jo surf yuzi kahisa ban sakti thai, because no one else in the building carried grief the way he did. He had lost more than any human should bear, his wife, his unborn son, and now, through a different kind of death, his daughter too. People whispered that he should hate Mara, others said he should forgive her. But David knew the truth was far more complicated. Dilinsan kasid hanahay hoda tutni ki bad wo or by Uljhanan main pad jada hai. Every night since the murder, he replayed the moments before the tragedy, the laughter, the baby gifts, the fleeting smile Jennifer gave him while holding a tiny blue onesie. And then he remembered Mara sitting quietly in the corner, distant, shrinking into herself. He wondered if he missed the signs, if he failed as a father, if Jennifer's death was not just Mara's breaking, but his own failure to hold the family together. The pain came in waves, one memory of Jennifer's kindness crushing him, followed by a memory of Mara as a child crawling into his lap saying, "Daddy, don't go to work today. Kays koi admi dono yadan ko ek sath sampol sakta hai." The world saw Mara as a murderer, a cold teenager, a danger. But he saw her as the little girl who used to collect seashells for him, who once cried because she broke her favorite toy, who hugged him after every school play. Yet he also saw the reality. That same girl had killed the woman he loved more than anyone on earth. He was stuck in a permanent emotional crossfire, love pulling him one way, loss pulling him another, guilt tying him to the ground in between. Even during the trial, he couldn't fully look at Mara, not because of hatred, but because every glance reminded him of both the best and worst moments of his life. Or yabat yuze andar si tad rahaithai, the realization that loving both victims, the mother and the unborn child, and the person who took them felt like trying to hold fire and water in the same hand. And still, despite everything, part of him wished he could understand Mara's mind, wished he could reach her, wished the girl he raised was still in there somewhere. But for Mara, the next chapter wouldn't be about family. It would be about surviving a world she was completely unprepared for. Adult prison. When Mara entered the state correctional facility, the reality of her new world hit with a force far colder than any courtroom verdict. Yeik 14 Sal kai larki ka wo safar sajahan bakpan, masumiet, orgar kai hifazet kakoi concept nahirikta. Prison wasn't built for children, and even though the administration placed her in a protected wing, nothing could hide the harshness of what surrounded her. The clang of metal doors, the echo of angry voices, the rigid schedules, the cold stares from older inmates passing by, each sound and sight chipped away at whatever innocence she had left. Mara had always been quiet, but here, her silence became a shield. Guards noted she rarely spoke unless required. She kept her head down during meals, avoided eye contact during medical checks, and spent most of her free time staring at the wall instead of joining any group activities. Wo bilkul alag ho chukithai, bakpan si garci dunia si. Counselors attempted sessions with her, but she responded with the same flat affect that stunned detectives. No anger, no guilt, no denial, just emptiness. "Do you understand why you're here?" they asked. She nodded. "Do you feel remorse?" She hesitated, then whispered, "I don't know how to feel." That sentence haunted every staff member who heard it. Mara attended mandatory education programs, yet her teachers said she participated mechanically, as if following instructions rather than learning. Other young offenders sometimes cried, raged, fought, but Mara never did. She just existed, suspended in a quiet emotional void. At night, when lights dimmed and the facility echoed with muffled sobs and distant shouting, Mara lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying memories she couldn't escape. Her mother's face, Ethan's name, the lighthouse statue, the moment everything broke. Usksapni Uski reality see Zayada and her Hoge. Staff noted she never asked for visitors, never asked about her father, never asked what would happen next. It was as if she believed she no longer had a place in the world outside those walls, but while Mara drifted deeper into isolation, her legal team was preparing the next battle, an appeal that would challenge the entire justice system. While Mara adjusted to the cold, unforgiving rhythm of prison life, her defense team was already preparing for the next phase. Ek AC legal yung jo surf Mara ki le nahai, balke puri juvenile justice system ki le ek test ban sakti thai. Her attorneys knew the verdict was hard to overturn, but the sentence, life without parole for a 14-year-old, was where the real fight would begin. Across the country, courts were increasingly questioning whether children, even violent ones, should ever be condemned to die in prison. Neuroscientists, psychologists, and juvenile justice advocates argued that a teenager's brain is wired for impulsivity, emotion-driven decisions, and incomplete understanding of long-term consequences. In Mara's case, tragic, shocking, complicated, became a symbol of that national debate. Her lawyers filed the appeal quickly, citing Supreme Court precedents that limited harsh sentencing for minors. They argued that Mara's emotional state, psychological immaturity, and distorted fears made her fundamentally different from an adult murderer. A child's crime, they wrote, should not receive an adult's destiny. They emphasized the misunderstandings revealed in the journals, the attachment issues, the catastrophic thinking described by experts, the lack of a fully developed prefrontal cortex. They stated that Mara's crime, while horrific, was rooted in emotional collapse, not calculated evil. Legal scholars began discussing the case on national platforms. Some agreed with the appeal. Kids can change, they said. Their brains are still forming. They deserve a chance at rehabilitation. Others rejected that argument entirely. Tell that to Jennifer, critics replied. Tell that to the unborn child who never saw life. The prosecution countered fiercely. They insisted Mara's calmness, her cover-up, her 3 days of deception, and the brutality of the act proved she understood exactly what she was doing. The state vowed to fight every attempt to reduce her sentence. The appeal battled forward like a storm, papers filed, hearings scheduled, experts brought in. Mara didn't ask about the appeal. She didn't ask what her lawyers were doing. She didn't even ask if she might one day leave prison. She remained silent, suspended between childhood and consequence. But outside prison walls, the community she once lived in was struggling too, trying to rebuild from a tragedy that left no heart untouched. In the weeks and months after the verdict, the Florida Keys community struggled to regain its balance. Yewo Jagathai Jahan Log Aksar Samandar, Kai Awaz or Sunset Kai Roshni Main Sukun Dun Te The, not a place where murder, grief, and legal battles usually took center stage. Jennifer's death shook everyone. Her students asked questions their teachers didn't know how to answer. Parents hugged their children tighter. Neighbors stayed awake at night wondering how a loving family could collapse from the inside. To honor Jennifer and her unborn son Ethan, her colleagues created a memorial garden at the elementary school where she taught. It wasn't fancy, simple benches, native plants, seashell borders, but it carried her spirit. Children visited to read, draw, talk, or just sit quietly, remembering the teacher who once taught them to love the ocean. Miss Morrison loved all of us. One child wrote on a card placed under a small palm tree. We miss her every day. The community also established the Jennifer and Ethan Foundation, dedicated to improving communication between parents and teenagers, helping families navigate emotional changes that often go unnoticed until it's too late. Workshops were held on topics like emotional development, adolescent fears, mental health red flags, and how small misunderstandings can turn into dangerous storms. Counselors taught parents how to spot silent cries for help. Teens learned how to express anger without collapsing into isolation. Logon Ni Is Foundation Kosurf Ek Charity Nahai, Balke Ek Zeroret Samcha, a reminder that tragedies don't appear out of nowhere. They build slowly, quietly, behind closed doors. The Morrison case became a point of reflection for the entire region. Families who once dismissed teenage mood swings as typical behavior now approach their children with more patience, more empathy, more awareness. Schools implemented programs to support students dealing with emotional stress. Churches organized healing sessions. Neighbors checked on each other more often. Grief turned the community softer, kinder, more alert. People didn't talk about Mara with anger anymore. They talked about prevention, understanding, and the fragile line between emotional hurt and irreversible action. Rehook. But even as the community healed, the biggest questions still hovered. Questions about justice, forgiveness, and whether a child who destroyed so much could ever be allowed a second chance. As the years passed, the Morrison case refused to fade. Yewo case ban Gayajiska Zikr Har Legal Conference, news panel or juvenile justice debate main Hoda Raha, splitting opinions down the middle like a wound that refused to heal. On one side stood those who believed justice had been served. Mara killed her pregnant mother, cleaned the evidence, lied for days, and showed almost no remorse. She knew exactly what she was doing, they argued. Age doesn't erase consequence. They pointed at the brutality of the blow, the calm cover-up, the emotional detachment, and insisted that society must be protected from anyone capable of such violence, even at 14. But on the other side were voices growing louder, psychologists, neuroscientists, social workers, and child advocates, arguing that a child's brain is not an adult brain, that impulsivity and catastrophic thinking can twist judgment in ways adults will never fully understand. A broken child does not belong in a cage forever, they said. She is capable of change. She is capable of healing. She is not the same person she was at 14. The debate took on a moral dimension. Is punishment meant to avenge or rehabilitate? Is life without parole humane for a teenager or a second tragedy? Yasawal hard discussion ko mazid uljadita. If a child commits an unforgivable act, should society still leave the door open for redemption? Journalists interviewed Mara's teachers, neighbors, classmates. Some said she was a quiet girl with potential. Others said something always felt off, a sadness she never talked about. And then there was David Morrison, the man trapped between two graves and one prison. He spoke rarely, but when he did, he said something that left even the harshest critics silent. I lost my wife and my son, but I also lost my daughter. Justice took them all. His words became the emotional center of the national argument. People realized this tragedy didn't have a clean villain or a clean victim. It was a collision of broken hearts, misunderstood fears, and a single irreversible moment. And years later, when the appeals were still ongoing, one person decided to tell the story from the only viewpoint no one had heard yet, the father. Years after the trial, the legal battles, the appeals, and the nationwide debates, one haunting question still circles the case like an echo that refuses to fade. Can a child truly carry a life sentence, or does the punishment become another tragedy layered on top of the first? Mara sits in prison, no longer the 14-year-old who walked onto the deck that night, but not fully an adult either. Ek asi hasty jo beach main kahin adak chuki high, suspended between the person she was and the person she might have become. Each year that passes reshapes her, but the walls around her remain the same. Outside those walls, Jennifer's memory lives on through the counseling programs, the memorial garden, and the hundreds of children she once inspired. Ethan's name remains etched into every conversation about the case, a reminder of a life never lived. And David, he is the living scar of the story. He carries the weight of loving three people, two lost to death and one lost to consequence. In interviews, he speaks quietly, carefully, like a man standing on emotional glass. There are no winners, he once said, only survivors. His memoir, Both My Children, did something the courts couldn't. It stitched together the emotional truth of the tragedy. Ki kabhai cattle surf ek pal kagalat face lanahi hoda, but a chain of missed signs, silent fears, misheard words, and a mind too young to understand its own storm. In the end, the Morrison case remains a mirror, a reflection for every parent, every teen, every judge, every lawmaker. It forces us to look at the fragile intersection where love, fear, misunderstanding, and violence collide. It forces us to ask if justice without mercy becomes its own kind of cruelty, and whether mercy without accountability becomes its own danger. Or sab siahem sawal yahai. Can a child who destroys a family ever rebuild herself? Can she ever find forgiveness? Should the law allow her to try? No court answered these questions. No verdict could, because in the silence after the final gavel fell, one truth remained. Sometimes the darkest tragedies don't end with a sentence. They continue to live in the hearts of those left behind.